Thank you very much, Sriram, for that generous introduction. You know, when one comes to speak to new audiences, one tends to worry more about the introduction than about anything else. Precisely for the reason he mentioned, that once people start looking you up on Wikipedia and, and the internet, you might find yourself being credited with things you've never done and also blamed for things you've never done. So I was listening with some nervousness, but I must say that I have absolutely no complaints about the very kind and generous words of Mr. Sriram. Mind you, you know that introductions are always more generous than the speaker deserves. In fact, I had a friend in New York who used to specialize in doing exactly this, looking up the speaker on the internet. But his curiosity was such that if he couldn't find enough about the speaker, he would also look up and down the family tree, the deeds and misdeeds of parents and uncles and grandparents and so on. So on one occasion he was going to introduce the speaker, and he found the speaker had an uncle who had been electrocuted at Sing Sing prison for kidnapping and armed robbery or something equally horrible. Having taken the trouble to look it up, he felt he had to use it. But all the introductions are as polite as Mr. Sriram. So what did he say? He said, our distinguished speaker had an uncle who occupied the chair of applied electricity at one of the nation's leading institutions. So that's the kind of introduction you just heard. Nothing bad or troubling has come out, but I'm very grateful nonetheless. President of the Kerala Engineers Association, Shri Rajiv Gopalakrishnan, Secretary Sam Jacob, Mr. Sriram, Mr. Venugopal, Kartika, the very many members and their families who are here today. It's a basic rule of public speaking never to deliver the first speech after lunch. You really are asking a lot of me. Not only do I have to make sense, but I have to keep you awake. And that may be a fairly big challenge. I think the only deal between us is that if you sleep, it's all right, but if you snore, I would urge somebody to just kick on the side so that I don't have too much competition except for the crying child at the back. I really am delighted to join you all. My fellow Malayalis here in Bangalore, and for the opportunity to talk about a subject that I believe is really important as we discuss the future trajectory of our nation, innovation in India. Now, there's so much interest in this gathering and exploring the subject is no surprise to me. I think Kerala engineers have always shown a talent for adapting and for looking towards innovation. Because we need to solve our countries and our societies' traditional age-old problems through new and creative ways. India has no choice but to increasingly move towards being an innovation-driven economy that looks towards both innovation and entrepreneurship as the path to the future, and where answers can be found through fresh kinds of thinking. Driven by factors such as the availability of both domestic and international funding, consolidation that's taking place of activities by a number of firms, the evolving technology space. We hear more and more of technologies no one talked about a few years ago: artificial intelligence, robotics, data analysis. All of this that's happening, and of course the increasing demand for new products and services in the domestic and global market. We're seeing a number of startups now permeating our landscape as Indians across the board have embraced innovation with enthusiasm and spirit. And to my mind, as engineering graduates, all of you probably understand these issues far better than most others in the country, and some of you are probably yourself already contributing to the changes I'm going to try and talk about. Now, the tradition of Indian innovation is not a new one, to be sure. We know about the Indians abroad who have already proved themselves in the large number of startups that they've done in places like Silicon Valley. I read a statistic that something like 32% of every single startup in the last 10 years in Silicon Valley has involved an Indian on the board or amongst the startup group. And Bangalore deserves a name. It's probably Silicon Plateau, as we were just saying a little earlier today. There's a place near Mumbai called Powai Valley, because of the number of startups located there. So Silicon Valley's habits have spread to our country as well. Please excuse me, there'll be a bit of coughing and spluttering through the speech because I'm battling a very bad cold and cough. But I didn't want to let you down by cancelling in the last minute, so I said I'd come. Been tanking up on medicines, but if occasionally I cough and sneeze, forgive me in advance. Now, the manner in which this proliferation of startups in our country has risen has made India now the world's third largest startup ecosystem. We had 4,700 startups in 2016. And we are on course to reach 11,000 by 2020. And that, I think, suggests a much larger story. Now, the options available to us are obviously, as a result, countless. I remember after my days in college how few were the options available to graduating youngsters in the India of the mid-1970s, which is when I graduated. Even within the higher education system today, there are more subjects that one can study, more courses available that didn't exist in my college days, and far more kinds of jobs and career options which are available to today's youth than could even have been dreamt of back then. The India in which I grew up was still very much a closed, socialist, protectionist economy. International exposure was limited. The term globalization hadn't even been coined. Today the world is smaller, opportunities are far greater, and the youth have a wide variety of options in India and outside that were simply not available to previous generations. India's economy has also transformed dramatically since the liberalization of 1991, when Dr. Manmohan Singh stood up in Parliament and memorably declared that no power on earth could stop an idea whose time had come. And that idea was, of course, that of the liberalization of the Indian economy, which not only gave us the growth and diversity that allowed us to weather the storms that confronted the global economy, particularly after the crisis of 2008, we were standing and growing when others were shrinking, but also has enabled us to overtake Japan to become the third largest economy in the world in purchasing power parity PPP terms. Indeed, given the core fundamental strength of the Indian economy, due in large part to the revolutionary reforms put forward by Dr. Singh, it's little wonder that in 2015 the International Monetary Fund predicted that the Indian economy would be the fastest growing major economy in the world. Now, unfortunately, the tragic mistake of the disastrous demonetization threw that prediction off the rails, and India fell behind China, but we're back again recovering. And I would say that one of the strengths we have is the dynamism of the entrepreneurs, the young people, the startup people on our side. And don't forget, we are the youngest major economy in the world. At a time when many of our potential competitors in Asia, even China, Japan, South Korea, are facing a serious demographic squeeze, and the world as a whole is aging. In fact, in Europe, the average age is going to be 46 by 2020. In Japan, it's going to be 47. Even in youthful immigrant-fueled America, it's going to be 40. But the average age in India in 2020 will only be 29. So we have this huge young population. About 50% are under 25. Approximately 65% are under 35. So the young are already a majority in our country. And a young country where a fresh graduate will be joining a dynamic, competitive, productive, youthful workforce could well be the engine of the world economy and could even consider taking that role over from China. In fact, the International Labour Organization has pointed out that by 2020 we will have in India 116 million workers in the job starting age group of 20 to 24, whereas China will only have 94 million. So we would have, in principle, the dynamic young labour force that could change the world. Our situation compares very well with the industrialized world, whose labour force will be shrinking by 4% by 2020. Even China's is going to go down by 5%, so they're aging, and India will increase by 32%. So as far as the age structure and potential is concerned, we have a huge competitive advantage. But as I found myself saying quite recently when The Economist magazine did its India summit, the truth is this demographic dividend could still be a demographic disaster. Because it'll only work in our favor if we can educate and train our young people to seize the opportunities the world makes available to them in the 21st century. But if instead we produce legions of undereducated or uneducated, unemployed and perhaps unemployable young men, then we're going to get a lot of frustrated young men. Then that's the reason why already we have seen Maoist incidents in 165 of the 707 districts in our country. And these are young men who, because they have no jobs, feel they have no stake in our society or economy, and are therefore susceptible to the blandishments of dangerous ideologues with 1,000 rupees and a Kalashnikov. And people don't realize that the alternative to a more effective education and skill development is really a disaster and a national security disaster too. I have been lamenting the fact that for the last 5 years, we have wasted almost criminally the opportunities to develop the skills of our young people. Neither the government nor the private sector has done anything to create vocational training centers. And in a country where if you want to be a carpenter or a plumber or a potter, you better have an uncle or a father who's in one of those professions, because nobody else is going to train you. And the result is the lack of qualified people in these essential vocational skills in the 21st century. On top of that, we see bright Kerala engineers sitting here, and yet there are no grounds for complacency. We are producing 500,000 engineers a year. India graduates 500,000, 5 lakh engineers a year. Do you know that 62% of them end up in jobs that don't require an engineering degree? Essentially, it's because the quality of engineering education they're getting is not good enough, or that it's not attuned to the needs of the market, or it's simply not required. And when employers are looking for skilled engineers, they turn around and say, these fellows need remedial education. So you go and see the campus of Infosys in Mysore, which I've done. It looks like an American university campus. Go and look at TCS's campus outside Thiruvananthapuram. What you're seeing is that companies are now taking upon themselves the obligation to complete the education of the engineers they're hiring. I'm not talking about on-the-job training. They're put through 1 more year of engineering studies to make them relevant to what the companies actually require. And if you look at the studies that have come out from all the employers' associations, FICCI, CII, ASSOCHAM, and so on, you're really looking at a situation in which, unfortunately, there simply is no faith on the part of the employers in the quality of the graduates that are available to them. Once you get past the elite institutions, they say those are islands of excellence floating in a sea of mediocrity, and for the rest, they would rather not hire these people to do engineering jobs because they're not qualified to do them. Now, this is where I think you all come in, because harnessing young India's potential and bringing about the social and economic transformations that we all hope for will require highly educated and motivated individuals, such as all of you, to provide leadership across all the sectors of our economy. It's because of this that India's burgeoning entrepreneurial ambitions can be a significant weapon in our national arsenal as we march towards greater economic growth. There's a celebration of brand India in places like Davos. Big business empires are being built. But I would argue that the real hope for our future is in the hundreds and thousands of micro, small and medium level entrepreneurial ventures, startups. Yes, some will succeed, some will fail, but the truth is that they will energize our economic spaces and throw up the best available minds and talents to transform the economy as we need to do it. And for that, we need to encourage the cultivation of an ecosystem of innovation That would be really having the right kind of spirit is half the battle won when it looks at finding the solutions to our economic challenges. Now, I'm confident that with the support and understanding of engineers like you, we will be able to find answers to the problems faced by India and the world at large. In 70 years, we found many creative solutions. I do feel a lot of pride when I think of how far we have come. From 1947, when the British left us, after half a century of less than 0.01% economic growth, an abysmal 17% literacy rate, 90% of the population living below the poverty line, and a life expectancy in India in 1947 of merely 27 years of age. Any Indian born in the British Raj could only expect to live to the age of 27. That was the kind of condition we were in, and those of you who've read my book, An Era of Darkness, will know we certainly have come a long way from that era of darkness since then, because today we're looking at a country in which, yes, it's still about 22% below the poverty line, but it's not 90. Literacy rate is still not perfect, but it's 79, not 17. And women who used to be 8.8% under the last years of the British are now at 69%, which is a vast improvement. Life expectancy has gone from 27 to approaching the biblical 10, getting close to 70. And of course, annual growth, even if it is not the numbers that the present government likes to claim, is far, far above the British levels. And during the UPA government averaged over 8% a year, now certainly not far from 7. Now, if we look at all of this, how do we build from this progress we have made into something better? Your creativity and spirit of enterprise is crucial. We really do need to appreciate the fact that some of the things we have done well, despite all the constraints in our society, are being studied in business schools abroad. I mean, the dabbawalas of Mumbai, who carry tiffin to lakhs and lakhs of employees in offices around the city, with a much higher success rate than any computerized food delivery system. That's being studied. Sulabh International, which builds toilets, is also being studied in places like Harvard Business School. Yes, there was a reference made, I think, about jugaad, and there's a lot of respect for jugaad, and there's also some skepticism about jugaad. You know what jugaad is, right? You patchwork solutions. You take an irrigation hand pump, put it on a bullock cart, put 2 tires on it, and you have created a makeshift vehicle to transport goods for you if you're a farmer. That kind of jugaad, of course, has its critics because it says you're just cutting corners. You're not inventing anything really new. But at the same time, I remember being invited to inaugurate the India Innovation Centre in Toronto University in Canada in 2011. They thought that an entire centre needed to be dedicated to Indian innovation because of what we were doing in that field. And the buzzword in those days was Indovation for Indian innovation. We haven't fulfilled that promise yet. And I would say that jugaad is largely about making do rather than striving for excellence. But what's important is to continue thinking out of the box, to repurpose things, to make do with what you've got within your resource constraints, but to create relevant solutions, think creatively, and bring non-traditional solutions to traditional issues. So I mentioned the Indian villager repurposing his vehicle to transport livestock by rigging a bullock cart with an irrigation hand pump. But that's not the only example. Many, many common machines and household objects are reincarnated in ways that their original manufacturers never intended. For example, in Punjab, where drinking lassi is the major activity in the summer and large quantities of it are made and drunk, somebody had the brainwave of converting a washing machine into a lassi maker, so they can make actually industrial qualities of lassi. Then you've got other kinds of creative innovation in India. We are the country that invented the idea of the missed call, right? So you send your son off to university, he doesn't have enough pocket money to pay his bills, so he rings you, disconnects, and then you ring him back on your bill. I mean, that is a wonderful Indian idea. No one thought of that in the West. So those things are happening. And then generally speaking, instead of complicating or refining their products, Indian innovators tend to strip them down to their bare essentials. And the logic is always, how do we make them affordable, accessible, durable, and effective? Indian entrepreneurial ingenuity, therefore, has produced a startling number of world-beating innovations. And I still argue, it's very unfashionable to say so, but none, in my view, is as impressive as the Tata Nano. I know it's been a marketing disaster in this country, but when you think about it, when it was first brought out in the market at 1 lakh rupees, that was the cost roughly of a high-end DVD player in a Western luxury car. Of course, there's no DVD player in the Nano, and no radio either in the basic model, but its innovations garnered 34 patents. And they're not merely the result of doing away with frills, and they did away with power brakes, with air conditioning, side view mirrors were knocked out. They reduced the use of steel by inventing an aluminium engine. They increased the space by moving the wheels to the edge of the chassis. And they relied on a modular design that enabled the car to be assembled from kits. And all of these prove conclusively that you could do more with less. And that, I think, is the Indian contribution. Whether the Nano succeeds or fails in marketing terms, in engineering terms, it's a considerable achievement, and we should see it as that. Or a different example, our mission to Mars, Mangalyaan. It cost the country 492 crores, okay? That was less than the budget of the Hollywood space movie Galaxy. I beg your pardon, Gravity. Their special effects cost more than actually sending Mangalyaan to Mars. And that, by the way, was also about 11% of the cost of the NASA program. Their Mars mission is 4,500 crores. Or take more human, down-to-earth examples. We have invented in India a handheld cardiogram, the GE Mac 400, which costs about 50,000 rupees. The cheapest international alternative would be more than double that price. The Tata Swatch water filter is just 1,500 rupees, 10 times cheaper than its nearest competitor. And if you go back to that cardiogram, it just has 4 buttons rather than the usual dozen. It has a tiny portable printer like the ones that waiters will bring you in fancy restaurants to print out your credit card receipt. It's small enough to fit into a satchel or a knapsack. It can even run on batteries, so you don't have to take it only to places where there's electricity. And it has reduced the cost of an ECG to just 50 rupees per patient, which makes it affordable even to the very poor. Similarly, the Swatch uses rice husks, which actually were a common waste product in most Indian rice farms. And the result is that water is purified. And when you realize that about 5 million Indians are dying of cardiovascular disease every year, and that about 2 million die from drinking contaminated water every year, you can see why these two innovations have been nothing less than groundbreaking. And that's the important thing, that they actually correspond to real needs of real Indians. I've come across a number of other examples of this kind of innovation: the low-cost, fuel-efficient mini truck, battery-powered refrigerator, electricity inverters with 5,000 rupees, solar lamps cheaper than even the Chinese ones, medical innovations that are widespread. An Indian company has invented a cheaper hepatitis B innovation, vaccine, which brings down the price. It used to be about 750 rupees per injection previously, and has now brought it down to about 15 rupees per injection of a hepatitis B vaccine. Insulin's price globally fell by 40% because India's leading biotech firm made insulin cheaper. A company based in Bangalore has a diagnostic test to test for tuberculosis and infectious diseases, and that machine is only about 10,000 rupees, whereas any comparable machine in the West is at least 5 lakhs. So you're looking at a very, very striking thing. And if you were to Google the words frugal innovation, you'd find the first 20 hits all relate to India. So we are doing innovation, we're doing it frugally and affordably, and to my mind, that is the great strength of India's entrepreneurial culture today is the frugal innovation. I was talking to Professor Mashelkar, the famous scientist, and he decided a couple of years ago to launch an annual prize for innovation in the name of his late mother. And that prize he wanted to give to innovations that responded to real social problems in India. So he was telling me his first prize in his first year was given to a young man who solved a very interesting problem. You know that we have about 15 million people blind in India, and most of them turn blind preventively. That is, they're developing glaucoma, cataracts, they don't get themselves tested. No one actually conducts a simple operation to remove that and make it possible for them to see properly. So, looking into why this was happening, they found that the very poor, who are mainly daily wage workers, cannot afford to go and get their eyes tested. Because if you go and you get these drops to dilate your eyes for the glaucoma test, you have blurred vision for the next 3 or 4 hours. You can't see properly. If you can't see properly, you can't do your work. You're a daily wage worker, that's one day's job gone. One day's wages not there, that day the family won't eat. It's as simple as that. So the worker will go and suffer as his vision is getting worse and worse, but will not go and get his eyes tested. So Dr. Mashelkar told me that the invention that he gave the prize to invented a new technique of eye examination that involves dilating the pupils without creating blurred vision for a few hours. The poor person can go get the test done in 10 or 15 minutes, is out of there, preventive action can be taken and necessary, but he can go back to work and do his job. That's the kind of innovation we need to see much more of. We also need to see more out-of-the-box thinking. If this young innovator had found a way of saying, why should eyes be tested only in one particular way? Why can't they be tested in a different way? That is, to my mind, the kind of question engineers need to be asking more and more. Some of you may have heard, especially those of you who watch my speeches on YouTube, that one of my favorite examples relates to myself. I wear glasses about 5% of my day at most, because I need them only for distance. I don't need them to read notes, I don't need them to meet people, I don't need them to eat, to read books, anything. But if I have to see something at a long distance away or watch a movie from the back of a hall or whatever, I would need glasses. And that's the only time I wear them. Now, because of that, I would frequently end up losing or misplacing my glasses. Most of the time I wasn't wearing them, and I'd either leave them on a desk and forget, or put them in a pocket and bang into a wall and break them, or in Kerala, going around in my munda, which has no pockets obviously, I would leave the glasses on my lap when I was sitting down. When I got up, the glasses would fall to the floor, somebody would step on them, they would break. And the result was that I remember the first 3 months of 2013, I lost or broke 6 pairs of glasses. And this was getting to be a bit of an expensive venture, so I was complaining to a friend, and he said, what seems to be the problem? And I said, the problem is simply this: for 150 years, people have made glasses only one way. They hang over your ears and rest on the bridge of your nose, and I happen to find that uncomfortable, so I take them off as often as possible, and that's why I lose or break them. I said, this shows that technology has stuck us with this formula. He said, no, we'll find a better way. And a few months later, he came back with what I'm wearing around my neck. Now I never need to take them out of my pocket or put them in a pocket or leave them on a table or rest them on a munda. They just hang around my neck. I forget they're there for 95% of the day. But if I need to see who's standing near that exit sign in the back of the room, I click them together with magnets in the middle, say hello to the gentleman in the back, and then I can unclick them again. A very simple innovation, but an innovation which, to my mind, shows the creativity we need to think out of the box. And that out-of-the-box thinking is precisely what we do not do enough in our country. This whole idea is not just to encourage in our schools a culture of learning what the teacher says, mugging up what the textbook says, regurgitating it in the examinations. We need a culture where we ask our children from the school days onwards to ask not only why, but why not? Why can't something be done differently? Why can't something be done innovatively? Why can't we think in terms of doing something in ways that haven't been done before? Now, there may be very sensible reasons why they can't be done, but they should be explained sensibly. No teacher should say to the child, that's simply the way it is and that's what you will learn. Because by that way, of course, no learning occurs. To my mind, we need to do much more of this, of coming up with a different sort of spirit of inquiry and creativity in our schools. And as you all know in your professions as engineers, it's no use. I think just today somebody was telling me at lunch that pretty much all they learned in engineering, they essentially had to forget after 10 years of doing engineering jobs because the world had moved on, technology had moved on, new skills, new ideas, information and techniques had to be mastered. And that is very much the world is. I was reading a study in the Oxford Martin School. It was, I think, much more about the Western world, but it said that in 2030, 60% of people, 60% of the jobs available will be jobs that don't exist today. And I started using that figure on the basis of that Oxford Martin study until last week I saw a FICCI study that claims that in India only 9% of the jobs at 2030 will be jobs that don't exist today. But even 9% is a lot. Can you imagine? There are jobs that are going to come into existence that we cannot imagine. Equally, of course, some of the jobs that we thought were new and outstanding contributions we could make have started disappearing. You know, in the 1990s, when the world became connected and the Y2K revolution came and Indian IT and software became famous and all the business process outsourcing companies started in India, we in India invented a new field called medical transcription. What would happen is that doctors in America would see their patients during the day, dictate their notes into a machine. The notes would be zinged over, the voice notes, to India, where somebody with adequate medical qualifications to understand these terms would type up the notes on their computer while the American doctor was asleep. Then they would zing them back to America. The doctor would come in the morning and find all his notes of last night typed up for him by some enterprising Indian in India. Far, far cheaper, 1/4 the cost of having an American secretary do it, and do it with all the mistakes that American secretaries were likely to make. So it became a booming business. For about 10, 12 years, medical transcription was the rage. India became the world leader in medical transcription. We got about 95% of the global market. Companies were set up in Bangalore and Chennai and Bombay and so on just to do medical transcription. You know what happened? The whole thing went bust in less than 15 years from invention. Because somebody invented sufficiently capable and sophisticated voice recognition technology that an American doctor could now simply buy the software once, talk into his computer, and his notes would come up instantaneously on the screen without the intermediary of somebody sitting in India typing it up. And now all the medical transcription companies are going out of business. That's how technology moves. When they set up those businesses 5, 6 years ago, they probably thought they were on a secure wicket. Today they've gone broke. And that means that we should be prepared similarly, that companies finding engineering solutions for 2018 may find those solutions are irrelevant in 2022. Our horizons are shrinking, our challenges are that much greater, and that's why innovation and habits of thought, of thinking creatively and differently, are going to be so much more important than in the past. Globalization, of course, still offers us lots of interesting opportunities, but there is a resistance now. What we're seeing with Mr. Trump, what we're seeing with some European governments, is more and more closing of the doors. We are also increasingly concerned, it seems to me, with some of the darker sides of globalization, the dislocations that have come about, which in India we have not fully experienced, because so far we've by and large seen ourselves as beneficiaries of the process. I've seen a lot of smart, bright young people, both as a constituency MP and as somebody who goes out, makes speeches like this, goes to convocations, sees engineering groups. And I'm impressed by the enthusiasm, the enterprise, the idealism that many young Indians, and particularly young Indian engineers and so on, have shown over the years. They are concerned with using their education and their skills to addressing serious national problems. We have already gone, I think, with a political focus on roti, kapda or makan to an increasing focus on Bijli, Sadak and Pani as well. And now broadband or 4G will also be something that voters will demand from their politicians. But as a politician, I would say that the largest thing that I want to promote is creative thinking. Because if you have the mind that will address problems, then you will be in a position to deal with unanticipated opportunities. I've said in another speech that, again, some of you might have heard, it's on YouTube, that in today's era you don't need a well-filled mind, because anything you want you can find with 2 clicks of the mouse on Google. What you need is not a well-filled mind, it's a well-formed mind. It's a mind that is shaped to respond to unfamiliar issues, facts, information, and to synthesize them, to understand them, to get insights into them, and to know how to deal with them. That kind of mind is very important. I mean, in fact, engineers have long understood the value of knowing how and knowing where. I mean, I still remember that old childhood joke about the company that bought an immensely impressive machine, which is working beautifully, and then one day, of course, it stopped working, and their in-house people tried everything to get it working again. Didn't work, so they had to call the manufacturer, sent over an engineer, and the engineer went back in literally in about 15 seconds, had clicked 1 or 2 things, changed 1 or 2 things, and the machine was working again. So they were very grateful, and they asked for his bill, and his bill was very high, $10,000. He said, $10,000, 15 seconds work? And he said, $1 for the 15 seconds work, $9,999 for knowing where to do it and how to do it. So that is the essential thing, that you need to be able to apply your mind to the actual challenges and required. Now today, we in India are facing a number of challenges, but we're also seeing a number of triumphs. I don't know how many of you remember, since we all get too many WhatsApps and internet jokes, the memes that went around a couple of years ago, when at that point the freshly re-elected British Prime Minister David Cameron went off to reclaim his mandate from the Queen. And people said, look, he's driving in an Indian car, it was a Jaguar, escorted by another Indian car. The police were driving a Land Rover. And these were, of course, both owned by Tata. Now, we have shown that we have the capacity and the ability to take over some of the world's best businesses. Both Jaguar and Land Rover were failing and loss-making when Tata took them over. Today, they're thriving, hugely profitable and successful. So we can make these things work. We can get over the old stereotypes of who can excel at what in our globalizing world. But what we need in India to do is innovation, creative thinking, entrepreneurs who can lead, who can innovate, who can inspire, and who can reach out beyond the limits that their forerunners had lived with. That's what I think you all can do. Is that hot water? Thank you so much. That's what I think all of you can do. It's important that as you embark on your professional activities outside this annual conference, that you look at innovation and you look at entrepreneurship as a way of resolving some of the age-old problems of our country, and see yourselves as leaders of India in your own right. It's not really the politicians, I think, who are going to find all the solutions. Our greatest strength will be we recognize the solutions you can come up with and help you to make them a reality. I remember the old joke that no politician in India can make a speech without quoting Mahatma Gandhi at least once. So let me quote Mahatma Gandhi, who said that it is the quality of our work that will please God and not the quantity. And I think he also most famously declared, be the change that you wish to see in the world. Since quality will not come without change in our country, I think both his exhortations apply to all of you and to all of us. Change yourselves to change the world, and do so with work, ideas, innovations of highest quality. I really thank you again for having invited me to address the Kerala Engineers Association annual meeting. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.